Look, I'm going to say something that might upset people on both sides of this debate. I don't think God of War Laufey is going to fail because Faye is a woman. And I don't think anyone who has that concern deserves a platform. But I do think that this game has some serious structural problems that nobody's addressed yet. Because the internet got so caught up in this gender war that the actual creative and commercial risks got completely buried. So let's talk about those. God of War Laufey was announced June 2nd at PlayStation State of Play. We got over 20 minutes of gameplay, which is actually a lot to work with. Faye, also known as Laufey the Just, dies at the start of God of War 2018. It's the very inciting event of the entire Norse saga. And now Santa Monica is saying, what if her death wasn't the end for her? She wakes up in this mystical realm called the Everywhen, the afterlife of the gods, where dead deities from every mythology in existence are fighting for power. Santa Monica even confirmed that this is a full mainline AAA entry, not some spin off or a DLC. This is the real next God of War. So here's my first issue. And like I said, it has nothing to do with Faye being a woman. It has everything to do with who Kratos is and why the franchise works. You see, God of War has always been led by Kratos. Across all games set in the Greek and Norse eras, the one constant was that players always played as Kratos. But it goes even deeper than that. Kratos is the emotional anchor of the entire franchise. Every boss fight carries weight because you feel his rage. Every quiet moment lands because you've been through his trauma. The relationship with Atreus hits so hard because the series spent years building Kratos into someone you understood on a fundamental level. You see, Faye just doesn't have that. We know her through absence. She is a ghost story that's been told by other characters. And while that might be a compelling idea for a narrative, the reveal of the mystery woman who set everything in motion, it's a much harder sell when you're asking players to spend 20, 30 hours in her shoes. There's a reason prequels and parallel stories are notoriously difficult to execute, because you already know how it ends. And that dramatic tension is structurally compromised from the jump. Let's also talk about the setting, because this is where I think the game has its biggest unresolved risk. The Everyone is framed as this transcendent afterlife where gods from every mythology converge. In the first 20 minutes of this reveal, we see the Mongolian and Egyptian mythologies show up. Here's my problem with that. God of War's strength has always been its depth, not its breadth. The Greek saga spent 6 games drilling into a single mythology with obsessive detail. The Norse saga took 2 full games just to properly explore 9 realms. The intimacy of those worlds is what made them feel real. When you replace that with a mythological buffet with Egyptian and Mongolian and Greek and Norse gods again, you risk going overboard and diluting the very thing that makes each tradition worth exploring. Think about it. What made Odin terrifying in Ragnarok wasn't just the fact that he was powerful, it's the fact that he was Norse. He carried the weight of the Yggdrasil, of the Norns, of an entire cosmological system that the game had built out. Sekhmet, one of the main antagonists in Laufey, is an Egyptian god of war who shows up in a Norse adjacent game in a post-death realm, fighting a giantess with a talking cube. How much emotional weight can that possibly carry if players haven't had the time to understand who Sekhmet means or why she matters? I think the Everyone is a fantastic concept on paper. It's the execution risk that concerns me. Let's also talk about the cube, Phranque. Voiced by Jack Quaid, he's the sentient, bouncing, gelatinous cosmic cube with a sword through him. And his friend Rue, a talking ribbon. The criticism surrounding Frank largely stems from concerns about tonal consistency. Some fans argue that a whimsical talking cube just feels out of place in a series that's known for its emotional weight and mythological depth. The director Ariel Lawrence has addressed this directly. She says that Frank was one of those first characters that were conceived for this game, that he's not comic relief, and that he's integral to both the combat mechanics and storytelling. I believe her, but that's not really my problem. My problem actually isn't about the cube itself. The concern is something that GameSpot actually put into words perfectly well. It's about what the critics are calling the Marvelification or the Joss Whedonification of God of War. The worry is that a whimsical companion signals a tonal shift towards quick, heavy writing. And there's historical precedent for that fear too. There's an incredibly insightful piece on this if you're interested by TheGamer that compares Frank directly to Cuff, the talking bracelet from Forspoken. Cuff, at his very best, worked. The dynamic was an emotional engine for Forspoken that gave it some of the best moments. The issue, however, wasn't sustainability. There were plenty of cracks that showed that this dynamic just wasn't enough. And the piece makes a highly uncomfortable but a very valid to consider point. What Laufey is being welcomed for with open arms is exactly what Forspoken was condemned for. The difference is largely in the logo in the corner. The God of War brand is buying Phranque enormous goodwill right now. Whether that goodwill holds across a 30-hour campaign is a genuinely open question. Here's another creative challenge that I don't think gets enough attention. God of War Laufey runs parallel to the events of God of War 2018 and God of War Ragnarok. It's designed as this companion story rather than a straight sequel or prequel. Parallel stories are structurally tricky. There's good ones like Rogue One or certain episodes of Breaking Bad, and they work because they recontextualize events you already know in shocking ways. But the worst ones just feel like they're filling in gaps that nobody really needed. They create stakes that feel false because you are aware of the outcome already. We know that Kratos and Atreus survived God of War 2018. We know that they survived Ragnarok. So when Faye is fighting to protect the ones she loves in the Everyone, that tension has a ceiling. The audience knows the ending. And Santa Monica needs to make Faye's personal journey emotionally compelling enough to carry the whole game, regardless of the larger plot. And that to me is an extremely high bar. There's also the market. Most developers across the entire video game space have been actively trying to avoid releasing a game in the same month as GTA 6, which is scheduled to hit shelves on November 19th, 2026. Let's hope that happens. But that's also why September 2026 is absolutely stacked. The current reporting suggests that Laufey is likely a 2027 release. Insider Nate the Haid accurately reported that the game would release in the first half of 2027. That sounds safe, but a first half 2027 window also means this game has to carry PS5 buzz for potentially another 9 to 12 months off a single 20-minute reveal with no release date. In gaming, that's a long time for discourse to handle. And the game market of 2027 is also going to be a brutal one. Between the GTA 6 hangover, Nintendo's new hardware, and a packed release slate, Laufey is going to need to be exceptional, not just good, to carve out the cultural moment that the Kratos games reliably created. So look, I'm not saying that this game is going to be bad. I want to be clear about that. Santa Monica Studios has earned an insane amount of trust. The 2018 reboot was one of the greatest creative pivots in gaming history. Ragnarok delivered on nearly every promise. The director, Ariel Lawrence, has been at the studio for 17 years. And the gameplay from the reveal looks legitimately impressive. It's faster, more aerial, with combat DNA that pulls from the original Greek trilogy in a way that feels intentional and exciting. Deborah Ann Woll's performance at Ragnarok was excellent, and she's carrying the lead here. But here's the bottom line. The Kratos games worked because of an almost unrepeatable combination. A character with decades of mythology behind him. A radical creative intervention in a father-son story that hit at exactly the right cultural moment. Laufey is asking you to care about a character you've only experienced through someone else's grief. In a world that's built from scratch, without the emotional anchor that made everything else work. I'm not saying it's an impossible ask, but it's a genuinely hard one. And that's where I land. Not because of gender, not because of controversy, but because of the stakes, structures, and the specific kind of magic that made this franchise what it is today. Let me know in the comments where you stand. Are these concerns valid, or do you think Santa Monica is going to pull it off? And if you find this useful, subscribe. I'm making more videos like these where we cut through the culture war garbage and actually analyze the real deal. Catch you all in the next one.